In computing, a graph database is a database that uses graph structures for semantic queries with nodes, edges and properties to represent and store data. List of graph databases. The following is a list of several well-known graph databases. Features. The table below compares the features of the above graph databases. Distributed processing. Angrappa, graph package in Hammer, a bulk synchronous parallel platform. Apache Hammer, a pure BSP computing framework on top of HDFS for massive scientific computations such as matrix, graph and network algorithms. Blazor Graph, a RDF, graph database capable of clustered deployment. Blazor Graph supports high availability mode, embedded mode, single server mode and has available commercial licenses. As of version 1.3.1, it supports the Blueprints API and reification done right. Cyclops, a computing and communication efficient graph processing system with significantly low communication cost. Faunus, a Hadoop-based graph computing framework that uses Gremlin as its query language. Faunus provides connectivity to Titan, a Raster-fronted graph databases, and to text binary graph formats stored in HDFS. Faunus is developed by Aurelius. FlockDB, an open-source distributed, fault-tolerant graph database based on MySQL and the Gizzard framework for managing Twitter-like graph data. Giraffe, a graph processing infrastructure that runs on Hadoop. GraphBase Enterprise Edition supports embedding of callable Java agents within the vertices of a distributed graph. Graph Engine, a free distributed, in-memory, large graph processing engine, formerly named Trinity. Golden Orb, Pregel implementation built on top of Apache Hadoop. GraphLab, a framework for machine learning and data mining in the cloud. GraphX, GraphLab built on the Spark cluster computing system. Dr. Joseph Gonzalez is the project lead, the creator of GraphLab. HIPG, a library for high-level parallel processing of large-scale graphs. HIPG is implemented in Java and is designed for distributed memory machine. IBM System G Graph Analytics Toolkit, a comprehensive graph analytics library consisted of network topological analysis tools, graph matching and search tools, and graph path and flow tools. It has been applied to various use cases and industry solutions. Imitator, a reliable distributed graph processing system with replication-based fault tolerance. Infinite Graph, a commercially available distributed graph database that supports parallel load and parallel queries. JPregel, in-memory Java-based Pregel implementation. Lionsgate, a distributed, browser-based graph database developed by Semblant. KDT, an open-source distributed graph library with a Python front-end and C++ MPI back-end. Muzan, an optimized Pregel clone that can be deployed easily on Amazon EC2, local clusters, standalone Linux systems and supercomputers. It utilizes runtime graph repartitioning between iterations to provide dynamic load balancing for better algorithm performance. OpenLink Virtuoso, the Shared Nothing Cluster Edition supports distributed graph data processing, Oracle spatial and graph loading, inferencing, and querying workloads are automatically and transparently distributed across the nodes in an Oracle Real Application Cluster, Oracle Exadata Database Machine, and Oracle Database Appliance. Phoebus, Pregel implementation written in Erlang. Pregel, Google's internal graph processing platform, released details in ACM paper. Power Graph, distributed graph parallel computing on natural graphs. PowerLira, a distributed graph analytics based on GraphLab using differentiated graph computing and partitioning on skewed graphs. Dynamically applying different computing and partition strategies for different vertices. Power Switch, adaptive prediction and mode switch on graph parallel computing. Sedge, a framework for distributed large graph processing in graph partition management, including an open-source version of Google's Pregel. Signal, Collect, a framework for parallel graph processing written in Scala. SQRRL Enterprise, distributed graph processing utilizing Apache Cumulo and featuring cell-level security, massive scalability, and JSON support. Titan, a distributed, disk-based graph database developed by Aurelius. Parallel Boost Graph Library, a C++ library for graph processing on distributed machines, part of Boost framework. Weaver, a fast and scalable graph store designed specifically for dynamically changing graphs. GPU graph processing. Medusa, a framework for graph processing using graphics processing units on both shared memory and distributed environments, allows users with no GPU programming expertise to leverage GPUs for graph processing. 8-person graph query programming languages. Bounds language, terse C-style syntax which initiates concurrent traversals in GraphBase and supports interaction between them. Blueprints, a Java API for property graphs from Tinkerpop and supported by a few graph database vendors. Blueprints, Net, a C#net API for generic property graphs. Bulbs, a Python persistence framework for Tinkerpop, Gremlin Server, Arexta, Titan, and Neo4j Server. Cipher Query Language, a declarative graph query language for Neo4j that enables ad hoc and programmatic access to the graph. Dave, a declarative graph query language for Semblant, Lionsgate. Gremlin, an open-source graph programming language that works over various graph database systems. Neo4j Client, a net client for accessing Neo4j. Neography, a thin Ruby wrapper that provides access to Neo4j via REST. Neo4j PHP, a PHP library wrapping the Neo4j graph database. Node, a Neo4j, a Node.js driver for Neo4j that provides access to Neo4j via REST. Pacer, a Ruby dialect implementation of the Gremlin graph traversal language. Pipes, a lazy data flow framework written in Java that forms the foundation for various property graph traversal languages. Pixie, a declarative graph query language that works on any Blueprints-compatible graph database. PyBlueprints, a Python API for property graphs. PyGR, a Python API for large-scale analysis of biological sequences and genomes, with alignments represented as graphs. Rexta, a graph database server that provides a REST or binary protocol API. Supports Titan, Neo4j, OrionDB, DEX, and any Tinkerpop Blueprints-enabled graph. RDF Sharp, a net API for modeling RDF graphs, storing them on many SQL databases and querying them with SPARQL. SPARQL, a query language for databases, able to retrieve and manipulate data stored in resource description framework format. SPASQL, an extension of the SQL standard, allowing execution of SPARQL queries within SQL statements, typically by treating them as subquery or function clauses. This also allows SPARQL queries to be issued through traditional data access APIs. Spring Data Neo4j, an extension to Spring Data, providing direct, native access to Neo4j. Oracle SQL and Place, SQL APIs, have graph extensions for Oracle Spatial and Graph. Stix, a data flow framework for C#net for processing generic and property graphs. Thunderdome, Titan Rexta object graph mapper for Python, no longer maintained. Mogwai, a Titan Rexta object graph mapper for Python, forked from Thunderdome. Rixpro Python, Titan Rixpro connection handler for Python.